For the second time in the 2023 season, the Florida Gators are set to hit the road. The first time they left Gainesville, well, it didn't go too well. They lost 24-11 in a sloppy season opener to the Utah Utes. And now they're looking to reconcile that. They ride a 3-game win streak, all of which came at home, including one over the number 11 team in the country at the time, Tennessee Volunteers. And it seems as if the train has gotten back on the track to an extent, with a chance to completely rid that defeat in week 1 from the mind of the nation with a victory over Kentucky on Saturday afternoon at Kroger Field. It's slated to be a tough endeavor. Florida struggled on the road substantially dating back to last season, really under Billy Napier. They're 1-3 on the road as a whole during his tenure. And they've also failed to combat this Kentucky team under Mark Stoops, who's really taken control of this annual series as of late. Can the Gators stop the skid, or will the Wildcats take number 4 of the last 6 in this contest? Find out my thoughts here on Carroll's Case. Yeah, man. I'm your host, Brandon Carroll, and you're watching another episode of the Tri-Weekly show dedicated to in-depth coverage of the Florida Gators football, basketball, and recruiting aspects of the program, with an occasional sprinkle of national topics, which I hope to get into more eventually. But for right now, this is all orange and blue. It's for the Florida Gators, as that's who I cover for siallgators.com. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and then comment your prediction down below for the Gators bout with the Wildcats in Lexington this weekend. Now let's get into what you're here for. Our weekly breakdown of Florida's opponents, the Kentucky Wildcat. Right now, Kentucky is a version of the team Florida wants to be. Obviously, at the University of Florida, the standard of success is a bit higher because of the history of winning. Obviously, you don't stop at 8-10 wins a year. Florida fans want that national championship, which is ultimately the goal wherever you go, but especially at a program that like Florida that's seen it before and seen it within the 21st century. But Kentucky's identity specifically is really what Florida wants to be. What Mark Stoops has built in Lexington is what Florida is looking to do in Gainesville, just on a higher scale. Because Kentucky is a hard-nosed, physical football team with the desire to really impose their will on all of their opponents. And that's been the case since Mark Stoops arrived nearly 11 years ago. And the Wildcats pride themselves on, or at least they have in the past, on operating methodically and wearing down opponents until they break. And that formula has led them to produce winning seasons in 6 of the last 7 years. And they've taken 3 of the last 5 contests against the Gators. And before Stoops, that really was unheard of. Kentucky never really was that team. They were never really the team that were going to kind of make a mark in the SEC or even against, a top half of the league team program. But they're doing that now. They're performing in that regard, which makes this contest crucial for Florida. But Kentucky specifically, offensively, like I said, they're known to be that smash mouth. They're known to be physical. They're known to be a run-first, heavy power rushing scheme used to kind of open up passing lanes with an occasional deep shot to break up the monotony. That hasn't been who they've been this year. Liam Cohen returned from the Los Angeles Rams and reassumed play calling duties that he controlled in 2021. And he said, hey, when he got back in the saddle, he said, hey, this offseason, we're going to get this thing going. We need to giddy up. We got to get this thing moving. Time to ride. You know what I'm saying? He wanted to pick up the tempo. He wanted to do what other teams around the country have done in the modern game, and that's play fast, that's play explosive, and play dynamic offense. And that's exactly what Kentucky's done this season. And they've been notably more comfortable operating at a faster pace with Devin Leary as their quarterback, transferred in from NC State this offseason, and it's resulted in one of the nation's most explosive attacks statistically. They've been balanced pro style, but they're often working out of 11 personnel, which means one running back, 1 tight end, and 3 wideouts, and they're passing the ball at nearly a 56% clip, albeit against teams that have been kind of stinkers, but they're still doing it at a rate that suggests that's how Kentucky's going to operate throughout the year. They've executed it to this point, and I don't see them changing that just because they're going into a matchup against Florida. The Cats haven't been afraid to sling around that rock this year. take shots toward the boundary, take deep shots. And it's paid dividends in how they've been able to operate offensively this year. They're averaging 38 points per game this year. They have the nation's 8th best yard per play metric at 7.8 in the first 4 weeks. Leary's combined for 1,060 yards and 9 touchdowns so far, and it looks like he's the piece that Cohen, the offensive coordinator, expected him to be when they brought him in from NC State this offseason. But the one thing that comes from the more heavy pass split, which is right now they've called 124, or they've attempted 124 passes, and they've only ran the ball 96 times, is volatility. Because as good as Leary's been at times, he's been just as bad at others. The stat line I provided earlier, 1,000, or just a second ago, 1,060 yards, 9 tubs. Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. But it's missing 2 important variables. He has also 5 interceptions to his name and a sub 60% completion percentage thus far in 2023. So this offense allowed to boom higher with Leary at the helm, but it's also kind of busting at a equal rate, really. It's producing at a higher rate than any offense really Mark Stoops has had in his past 10 years, in the 11, like I said earlier, that he's had in Lexington. But you can also tell it's year one of this style, mainly because the decisions made by Mr. Leary, who I would like to say when he's playing at the peak of his game, he is one of the best quarterbacks in this conference. Unfortunately, he hasn't been playing at his best at all times. It's been a very up and down, peaks and troughs type season for Leary. So there's times where it's like, oh, wow, he's really producing. And there's times where it's like, oh, gosh, this guy is struggling. And it's resulting in bad decisions. It hasn't clicked consistently. If you watch their game against Vanderbilt last week, you see where, Kentucky jumped out to a big lead. And it looked as if you watch the scoreboard in that one, that both Wildcats units were ticking. And to some extent, that's true, but it doesn't show the downfield heave into double coverage that was underthrown and picked off. 1 of 2 on the day from a really errant Devin Leary. He has a propensity to be errant with his throws, and there were multiple that were turnover worthy. 2 of them turned into interceptions, but there could have been more. So while they're moving that fast, reeling off chunk yardage, playing winning football in a vacuum, scoring points, it's so hit or miss that it could be really trouble when they face a team that is strong defensively like Florida. And I expect as they get into the thick of their competitions, we won't necessarily see them shift back to what they were in that smash mouth running football team. But I do expect them to kind of regress toward the mean and see a lot more balanced approach. I said it's a balanced attack overall, but that 6% swing in favor of the passing game in terms of the 56% of the time they're passing the football, 44% of the time they're running the football, I think it becomes closer to 50-50, especially because the running game hasn't been bad. It's been averaging 5.5 yards per carry team-wide. Backs Ray Davis, who was on Vanderbilt last year, who actually produced in a significant impact when Vanderbilt beat Florida in Nashville, along with Juton McClain. They've shined when given their opportunities. 6.3 yards per carries apiece, 6 combined touchdowns, over 87% of the team's rushing production. I expect them to see a higher rate as the year goes on, a more voluminous role. But ultimately, this team is a passing team, and it's different from what we've seen in the past. It's different from what Kentucky's really been known to do. But don't mistake the fact that they're trying to spread this thing out as they've gone soft. Because at the end of the day, Kentucky is still that physical, hard-nosed, imposing football team that we've come to know. Because it starts up front. And it might not look as if it's the same as it has been in the recent years, but they can still get it done in that fashion because that's how they're built to play. Then defensively, you have really a veteran unit that serves as the heart and soul of this team. If Kentucky produces substantially in the SEC East this year, they find a way to finish second or third in the East, it's because of this defense. this defense is legit. It's a 4-2-5 base with linebackers working tight in the box. They play a good balance of man and zone coverage, possess a lot of trust in their defensive backs and their secondary. They've cashed in with 2 scores last week as Maxwell Hairston was able to pick off and take back 2 balls against Vanderbilt and AJ Swan. And as a result, they can mix it up. They can play in a variety of ways, and it doesn't necessarily have to be one. They don't have to go in one direction because they have guys who are moldable and guys who can perform in several different coverages or personnel groupings and things like that. You see this week, I think you'll get a lot of loaded boxes with zone coverage across the board, forcing Florida to try to beat them through the air, forcing Graham Mertz to be the one who sits back there and tries to pick them apart. And sure, he's great at finding zones, but ultimately how Florida wins this game is the rushing game, which I'll talk about in a little bit later. But when teams are kind of forced into those passing situations, I think Kentucky does a great job of producing a similar game plan or performing a similar game plan as to what Austin Armstrong performs for Florida. You'll see Kentucky send 4 at all times. Or not at all times, but most of the time they're going to send 4, but it's not your traditional 4. It's not your 4-down lineman. They're going to send a creeper, usually from the second level. And while the Gators have Scooby Williams to be doing that, he's the one who they'll deploy in a pass rushing role on 3rd downs and passing situations. Kentucky has Trevin Wallace. And his name will be called frequently on Saturday because he is their Swiss Army knife, similar to how Williams is UF's. Wallace is deployed in a multitude of different ways. He can rush the passer. He's excellent in run stop. He really can work in space too, which they like having him there a lot. And he's equally effective in all of them. It's a talented unit for Stoops defensively, and one that will likely be the calling card of this Kentucky team in 2023 moving forward. They have a lot of veteran pieces, a lot of guys who have been in the program for a while, and guys who can produce at such a high rate that it suggests that Florida could have a lot of trouble on Saturday, which Kentucky could have a lot of trouble as well. But talking about Kentucky's defense, it's the real deal. They got some dudes. They can put it together. Now, all of what I just said in terms of what the offense looks like, what the defense looks like, that's all been shown against the nation's 132nd toughest schedule. That's right. Kentucky is last in strength of schedule to this point in the season. But it doesn't necessarily negate the philosophical approach they've employed thus far. Because at the end of the day, teams are going to play to their strengths, whether that's against the worst team in the country or the best team in the country. They're going to try things against the worst team in the country, which could be differing from what you see when they go and play a team that they know they cannot make mistakes or they know they have to play within their identity. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be moving forward in just a completely different light. Like, if Kentucky comes out and runs the ball 60% of the time this weekend, I will be shocked because that's not what they've been through 4 weeks. I don't expect them to be that at all. I expect them to be what they've done through this point in the season. It's modern. They lean towards the pass. They allow Devin Leary, who, like I said, is talented when performing at his peak, I should say. Or not his peak, but just when he's in rhythm. And because of that, you're going to see a lot of the same things carry into this contest against the first team that they've seen ranked in the top 25 or really the top 75 nationally in 2023. Because the teams they've played have been, Vanderbilt's been the best team they played, if that gives you any perspective on what Kentucky's been through so far this season. As for this contest specifically, it's going to be a dogfight. An uber important one for both squads, especially for Florida. I laid out 3 games this offseason. 3 games that I thought would define Florida's year in 2023. The first one was Tennessee at home in week 3. They took care of business. They took down the number 11 team in the country and did so in a resounding fashion. Next on that slate from the 3 games that I laid out, that came in week 3, week 5, and week 7. Week 5 is here, and it's the bout in Lexington against the Kentucky Wildcats. And if you ask anyone in or around or tuned into the Florida program what the most critical game for Florida's success this season was on the schedule, I'd bet 99 out of 100 tell you it's this one. Both now and in the preseason. If you were to ask me in the preseason what game would be most important, Kentucky. Because it's against a divisional opponent in a hostile environment, which has proven to be Florida's boogeyman under Billy Napier. They're 0-2 against SEC programs, and they're 1-3 on the road since his arrival last year. They lost to Tennessee and Vanderbilt on the road last year, and then they lost to Florida State, and then to start this year, they lost to Utah. And this is the first opportunity that they get to really ditch that weight off their shoulders. Can they do it? Well, come here. Get in here. Come on. Get in close. Let me tell you how I think it shakes out. The talk this week has been mainly about the two transfer quarterbacks in Devin Leary and Graham Mertz and how they will be the one to decide this game. And while I think it's somewhat the case in this game, I think both teams look at this contest differently because of how they have shaped their identity in the 2023 season. Each team is focused on a different aspect of their offense in order to win this one. For Florida, it's the rushing attack. They're playing against the SEC's best rushing defense to date, allowing just 77.5 yards per game through 4 weeks. So really, Florida is playing against a team that is built to beat them. Because if teams can stop the run against Florida, they have a great chance of in this week it's not an upset, but going forward, really any team that they play, whether they're favored or not, can beat Florida if they simply stop the rushing game. As a result, Florida knows they need to run the football. That's their identity. That's how they win offensively because it helps them control the clock. It helps them move the football, and it helps them score points. Trevor Etienne specifically has shined for Florida's offense this season, especially in a big win over the Volunteers. Kind of had a step back in week 4 against Charlotte, but the sophomore is averaging 6.7 yards per carry. He's notably elusive and just explosive. He brings that, I'm not a big fan of the word, but aura of a big play every time he gets in open space with his, really electric style of rushing. He provided a massive aid in week 3 against Tennessee with 23 carries, a career-high 172 yards, and a 62-yard touchdown in the first quarter to really jolt the Gators to life after going down 7-0 after, a missed field goal. And then Tennessee just moves down the field quickly. It looks as if, this one could get ugly. Florida has an explosive play. Momentum flips, and it never goes back to Tennessee. Last week, he only got 8 carries, so the legs should be fresh. And he's working behind a fully healthy offensive line for just the second time this season. Healthy and intact. Healthy and intact. That's how Florida's offensive line can be described right now. Obviously, you get Kingsley Eguakun back in the middle, and then you get the two pieces on the right in Micah Mazzccua and Damian George back in the fold after each served a first half suspension last week, and Mazzccua ended up serving a full game suspension with a second half. He was held out of second half action because of in-house discipline for his role in the Tennessee altercation. But they said he's back, he's ready to go, and he will be there for Florida. And this is just the second time all year that Florida's had all 5 starting offensive linemen intact. It's at the perfect time because for Florida to win this one, they need to have another explosive, big, high-volume rushing game, specifically from Trevor Etienne. And I know UF likes to adhere to the running back rotation, but it's evident when guys got it. It's evident when they're nice with it. All right. You can tell when a dude's a dude. All right. And Etienne, it's evident. It is every time he touches the football. This guy's a dude. He can get after it. So they have to feed him the football to win this contest. The ground attack in its entirety. You look at Trevor Etienne, Montrell Johnson, the occasional rush from a Ricky Pearsall or Trey Wilson. Treon Webb could be involved. It has to get a total over 150 yards on the ground to beat the Cats. That would nearly double their season average of allowed yards on the ground, which means that Florida's offense is operating smoothly. It's not playing from behind. It's controlling the clock, and it's keeping the ball away from a team with a propensity for big plays thus far in 2023. Billy Napier doesn't want to put the game in Graham Mertz's hands. This scenario means he doesn't have to. And it's not necessarily a distrust for Mertz. That's not what they brought him in to do. He knows that's not what they brought him in to do. So if they can rush the football, they put themselves in a great position, not only to compete, but steal a victory on the road against a team that has had their number. On the flip side, Kentucky will look to their quarterback to lead the way. Although, like I said, I do expect a balanced rushing attack with Davis and McClain. Sure, it's imminent. It's likely imminent. But Devin Leary is your guy. And what does that mean? You have to look to Devin Leary to get the ball and the weapons. And you have to look to Devin Leary to get the ball to your weapons at all three levels and take care of the football. Tavian Robinson, Barian Brown, Dan Key, get the ball in their hands and let them cook. I think he's able to do that consistently enough to elevate this unit in this tightly contested matchup. He's able to sit back. He might not have a ton of time because I think Florida's going to try to be aggressive and force him into some of those mistakes that we've seen, him make at times. But I do think that they put him in a position, or I think Kentucky puts him in a position where he can hit quick hitters, which ultimately open up the deep game, which is where they're going to win this. But the necessity to sling the rock around the yard, like they're going to really look to do, isn't a green light to be reckless as he has at times this season. I think he offers that Florida defense the opportunity to create turnovers. And like I said, I expect Austin Armstrong to see that and play aggressive to force him into some of those errors. I think they at least come away with one interception. I think over one would really swing this game in Florida's favor. If he produced his second multi-interception game of the season 2 weeks in a row to a point where he was just rattled and thrown off his game completely, which would mean, Florida's playing in good field position. They potentially get a defensive score. That would be immensely valuable in a game where points are going to come at a premium, in my opinion. But ultimately, I think he will make an interception, likely earlier in the game, make a bad throw. He'll settle down, and he'll find the Tavian Robinson, the Barian Brown, the Dane Key at short, intermediate, and deep levels of the field. Really not pick apart Florida's defense because that would entail them consistently moving the ball downfield, scoring. But I think there are drives where his experience as in his 6th year of collegiate football kind of come to pass, and we see him settle in and produce in that form. And it's not necessarily a knock against the Gators defense. I just think it's a byproduct of how Kentucky's performed offensively this year. I think Kentucky's able to do their part better than Florida's able to do theirs in terms of Devin Leary performs for Kentucky, or Florida's rushing game doesn't necessarily step up to eclipse that 150-yard mark like I set out for it to do to be able to win this game. It'll be a defensive struggle all the way around. I see both teams struggle to score the football. The first team to surpass 20 points in this contest will ultimately win it. Florida's defense will maintain its hot start to the year to stifle the bulk of the Wildcats offense. But as good as they have been, like I said, Kentucky has proven to be an explosive offense. They've proven that the one thing that they can do that Florida struggles with is hit a big hitter. Florida allowed that 70-yarder on play one against Utah. They allowed a few against Tennessee that we thought was going to, ultimately in the beginning allow the Volunteers to beat Florida, and then later in the game allow them to make a miraculous comeback. Obviously, neither of those things happened. They were able to slow it down. But in a game where points don't come as often as they did in that Tennessee contest, that could be a serious problem. I think Florida ultimately falls victim to that explosiveness of Kentucky, and that Florida's given up at times. Kentucky's able to slow Florida's rushing attack, force Graham Mertz to air the ball out, and similar to week 1 at Utah, not necessarily to the extent of it, not as drastic, but still significant enough to force Florida away from their identity. And Florida falls on the road to Kentucky, dropping to 3-2 on the year and giving Kentucky their 3rd win straight in this contest. I have it as a tight, like I said, defensive struggle that comes down to the very last second. I think Florida's leading at one point, 20-14. Kentucky hits a big hitter maybe midway through the 4th quarter, go up 21-20. Florida's unable to go down and get the points needed to outlast Kentucky in that contest, and Florida falls 21-20 in that game. I'm excited to read your comments on why I'm wrong. Try to make them as nice as possible, though, because no one needs their feelings hurt. No, I'm just kidding. I don't really. Y'all won't hurt my feelings. Please just let me know what you think of my prediction and why you think Florida should win this game. I have a feeling that a lot of you will be on that boat. But thank you for watching this preview and prediction episode of Carroll's Cadence. We are officially at 550 subscribers here on the channel, and I'm pushing forward for 600, baby. I want it before the bye week. I'm greedy. So if you're enjoying the show, make sure to like this video and drop a comment so new users can see it. Tell your friends, your parents, your siblings, your neighbors, your dogs, whoever you think would enjoy this program. Tell them that we're here. Tell them that we are moving and we are giving you some insight into the Florida Gators football program. And we're analyzing Florida Gators opponents each and every week on Friday afternoon. I probably should be doing a better job of kind of marketing with short clips and such, but for now, I'm going to use my people that I got here along for the ride to get the word out there. I believe in y'all and love all 550 of you. I hope everyone enjoys game day and everyone enjoys Florida, Kentucky. Get your TVs set up if possible, because let me tell you, there is an electric slate of college football games in week 5 that I am pumped to sit back and watch after I finish working for the Florida, Kentucky game. Of course, I'll be back on Monday for our review of this contest. Don't miss that one. For Carroll's Cadence, I'm Brandon Carroll signing off. Everyone have a great weekend, and I will catch y'all on Monday.